If New York City Council passes Bill 49/2010, the only birds that will be released at ceremonies will be birds like these, homing pigeons. That's because any other kind of release ends badly.
The most heartrending example of abuse of this was the September 11th first year anniversary. And that was right on the site. And they had, I don't know if it was 50 or 100, great numbers of birds that they threw up in the air. And those birds had not flown before and were not flyers, were not homers. They want the beautiful thought of wings flying to the sky. And these birds instead came crashing down onto the people in the crowd and into the river.
Councilmember G. Oliver Coppell's office initiated legislation after a widely publicized incident in Queens last summer where approximately 100 white birds were released. While several birds died of exposure, many survived thanks to an all-out effort by a network of New York's animal rescuers.
They've found their way into a tree or as a flock, and then it began to rain and they all fell down, soaking wet.
We could see that there were birds, small white birds, just huddled at the bases of numerous trees. And so the fact that they were on the ground really meant they were in trouble.
They couldn't fly, they couldn't find food for themselves, they were just being rained on for days.
They'd never experienced rain, they didn't know what it was, how to shelter properly.
A lot of them were kind of in a daze, they were cold. They probably hadn't eaten for a while. I think that first night we found maybe about 10 or 11. They were really bedraggled looking, and a lot of them had scrapes and bruises. Over the next few days, many other people went out. It became clear that there were many, many more. By some estimates, there must have been at least 80 or 90.
Stephanie and her partner Alan and other people in the community went back day after day to try and rescue them and find homes for them.
We heard from someone who had 4 and couldn't keep them, and so we took those.
Then they stayed here in the gallery, in the offices for a little while. I want to say a few months maybe. And they had been marked for tracking purposes. And so they were all these multicolored doves that would coo throughout the day while you're working.
New York City has a thriving bird rescue community, but it wasn't activists who demanded the legislation. It was the birds themselves that inspired Coppell's staff. In 2006, Coppell got a visit from some fine feathered constituents.
And they literally walked into the office while we had the door open. They walked all the way through the office and they came right back here into Oliver's office. One of them sat on the couch, one of them sat on his chair. They let us pick them up, pet them, feed them. They kept coming back. They'd be huddled outside and it was cold outside. And we said there's something wrong with these birds.
It turned out that a neighboring resident was breeding the birds, ring-necked doves, but had moved out and left the birds behind, and the landlords evicted the birds.
Not knowing they couldn't survive in the wild, and only 4 did.
These lucky 4 were adopted by Councilmember Coppell and his staff. When they heard about the incident in Queens, they knew they had to do something. So they asked for expert advice when drafting the legislation.
If for an event someone were to get homing birds that are true homers, they would release them there, the birds would fly up, they'd be beautiful, and they'd be home probably in half an hour. If you had a local business that truly had homers, that the birds know where they live, it would be fine.
Rick Bonadis says the only birds he releases are specially trained homing pigeons. He's been raising and training birds since he was 12. He's in favor of the legislation.
I think it'd be good for the overall business, the white dove release business, just because you won't hear the horror stories anymore of the priests chasing the birds around for the previous wedding, or the birds getting stuck in the park like they did in Queens.
A former policeman and a current New York City fireman, Bonadis says many people don't know that homing birds are the only doves imprinted with an instinct to return to their roost.
90% of the people don't believe me that they come home. So then I make a little bet with them. I says, take a piece of paper, write a message on it, I'll put it in the bird's leg, and when the bird comes home, you got to pay me $100. And usually after that, they say, no, I believe you.
While some people may say that New York City Council should concentrate on legislating matters of civic affairs, members of the animal rescue community offer a different thought.
The bottom line is the humane way to treat a fellow creature, not to use them as a commodity, where they're just bought and then discarded. And that's basically what they're doing. They buy the bird, throw it up in the air, they're discarding it because it has no means of living. And beyond that, if we don't care about these creatures, if we have an injured animal and we don't care about it, or it's going to be injured if we don't care about it, what does that say about us? We are not humane.